What's going on YouTube? It's HP from HP Speed. If you've seen my previous videos, you've seen me work on this Hyundai Accent a lot because this vehicle was having an intermittent starting issue. Well, in my research, I found more problems. I fixed the issue. It starts up perfectly fine now, which is great. But I found that the alternator is on its way out as it's giving irregular voltage. So we have to replace that. Now, if you're not familiar with Hyundai Accents and these 4-cylinders, these 1.6 liters, you may not know that yes, you do have to change the oil in order to replace the alternator because the alternator falls right down past the engine oil filter. Now, this car has been out of service for quite some time, and I honestly can't remember the last time I even did an oil change on it. And looking at the crudely drawn on oil change sticker, I think it says 116 or maybe it says 113. And right now it's about 114,214 miles. So let's get started on the oil change. We'll drain the oil and then we'll move on to replacing the alternator. Now I've gained some weight recently, so I don't need to do some of this stuff and you don't have to either, but I like to have more room, and that way I'm not bumping into things. I like a clean workspace, and I don't like to make any more mess ups. So I am going to jack up this vehicle, remove the front wheel, and then get ready to do the oil draining, which is the first step in replacing your alternator. So now for the underneath, we do have to remove this splash shield to have more room to work with, which is just a bunch of 12mm bolts. So let's go ahead and take those off. Now with that splash shield removed, we need a 17mm bolt to get the oil pan bolt off to drain the oil. And if you are a professional like me, you didn't get any oil on your hand when removing that oil. Where are my towels? So now while the oil is draining, I just realized I kind of feel a little naked. I need to get dressed. Oh. Alright, now that the oil's done draining, let's go ahead and put that plug back on and let me show you why we need to remove the oil filter. So as we can see here, the alternator is quite literally right above the oil filter. So let's screw that off so we have a little more room to work with and we can feed out our alternator out of that little space. Oil draining is complete and the filter is off, so let's get started with the alternator. Now, alternator is electrical, so let's go ahead and disconnect the battery. 2 10mm bolts on your positive and negative terminal of your battery. Bada bing, bada boom. You can just place these to the side, just like that. Cool. Let's take a look at our new alternator. This is kind of roughly how it is sitting in the vehicle as well. You have this top bolt and then you have this lower one which actually bridges all the way across in a big stud. Now, the important thing is looking at this top one, this is also your belt tensioner for your pulley. So as we can see, that pulley down there where the alternator sits on, the belt wraps around that. To loosen that particular belt, you have to get down there. So as we can see, we have a little jubilee of stuff going on. We have to move some of these wires. So let's move the power steering wire, which is quite literally this one right here. We're going to disconnect that harness so we can get it out of the way. And let's disconnect the one that's on our alternator as well. Now we have more access to those 2 bolts. Now I can't move the pulley because though this tensioner is going to release and it'll release tension on the belt, I need to get underneath and loosen the lower stud right here first. So it's that bolt right there. It's going to be hard to film this at the same time. So all I'm going to do is put a short 12mm socket on there and just hit it a couple of times just to get it loose. So looking at that top connector, facing the front of the vehicle is this 2 little tabs. We're going to press that inwards and then we're going to pull out. Just going to press on that. Alright, got it loose and we're out. So now we can move that away. Now we have to get to the back of that power harness on the alternator. That is also going to be a 12mm bolt, it looks like. I can kind of move the harness harness out of the way. Awesome. Now we can see it is disconnected. Now the alternator is only being hung on by this tensioner and that lower bolt. So up next we have to get to this bracket right here, which is the tensioner bracket. So this one secures the alternator to the bracket, which secures it to the vehicle, but we need to loosen this so we can get the belt off, and then we can pull this bolt all the way off. So this engine oil dipstick's kind of getting in my way. Just gonna bend it out of the way a little bit. Now that the alternator is loosened, I can now move that tensioner, and that way we can get the alternator to swivel forward and we can fish that belt off. Now this tensioner is also a 12mm bolt. I have to use a small ratchet to get in there. Now this little tensioner is also a 12mm bolt, and you're going to be doing loosey so you can get it to come out a little more, and now we can remove the alternator bolt that's holding it to the bracket. Yeehaw! Now we can just lift this out of here, just like that. We can move our alternator a little more freely now. As you can see, it just moves. We're going to push it towards the vehicle. That way we can fish that belt off, which is right here. Fish it off with your hand, and it probably fell off into oblivion. Now, the only thing holding your alternator to the vehicle is going to be that lower stud bolt. So let's pull that all the way off, and then we're going to move the stud towards the wheel of the vehicle and pull it out. Now, something you should be very aware of is that that harness that was going up to the top, to the back strap of the alternator, is actually fixed with that little tab. So make sure to pull that off, or else your alternator will not come out and you'll pull on the wires. Now that we have the bolt removed, as you can see right there, we're going to guide the bolt that way, and that way we can pull our alternator out and down. What the hell is that? Oh. Now this does happen with alternators sometimes. The dowel pins that are holding the alternator, where the stud goes through, kind of get a little stuck. We're just going to put a little pry bar and pull, or I'm sorry, technically pry the alternator away from that mounting surface. That could have been your head, so be careful. And Aubrey's home. So the pry bar definitely helps to shift that out of the way and break up some of that corrosion that's in there. So looking at our alternators, I like to go remanufactured. They just end up redoing some of these wires. And as you can see, this one, it looks to be pretty fine, but the difference was this one was causing an irregular voltage, which means sometimes at higher RPMs I was getting the correct voltage. At idle it was kind of draining a little bit. So now we're going to put the new one in. Same process in reverse. Let's go ahead and get it in the general area and try to thread that last bottom stud so it can swivel correctly. So as you can see, I got the new alternator loosely in there. I was able to fish it with the pulley facing upwards and then rotating it to the right so the pulley now faces the correct direction. And once I was able to get the bracketing loosely lined up, I was able to slide the stud in there with my right hand, and now I'll just have to put the bolt that holds the alternator, and I'm actually going to put my grounding strap and my connector on first since they're right here. Very easy to access and very easy to tighten down. And then once those are firmly fitted, I'm going to push this back upwards and tighten my bolt just enough to where I can still move the alternator back and forth, but I have some more wiggle room. Now with the alternator situated, we can see that the bracketing is lining up on the end of the hole. Now we must look at our tensioner, and we're going to slide that to the very end. That way this can bolt to the alternator, and then once this is kind of somewhat threaded, we can pull the entire alternator this way, causing tension on the pulley. Now in addition to getting our alternator lined up and plugged in, I made sure to get the belt already lined up That way, when we start tightening our tensioner, it's already going to be pulling our belt to tension as well. Now to get it to tighten a lot faster, I ended up using this swivel attachment with a 12mm shorty on my electric ratchet. If not, you'll have to do it by hand. And then now we can tighten down that last one and secure the alternator so it doesn't move out of position. Now that the alternator is secured, we still have to tighten the bottom bolt, but let's go ahead and plug in all of our connectors. And move our dipstick tube back. Now that our alternator has been secured at the bottom, now the only thing left to do is to complete the oil change. I like to use Motorcraft FL810S. I like Motorcraft filters on every vehicle just because the quality is actually really well built, and they have really nice drain back springs in the back, and their filter media is just kind of uncompared. This is kind of my go-to because they're domestic, they're very cheap, and you know they're not going to fall apart on you. So let's go ahead and thread this on, fill it up with oil, and then reconnect our battery. So this vehicle does take 3.5 quarts of oil with a filter. I went and checked the fill line after I filled it up without starting the vehicle, and it's above full, so by the time it gets to the filter, it should even out perfectly. If not, I can add a little more, maybe bring it up to 4 quarts. Let's get it started. Moment of truth, hopefully it doesn't blow up. Fires right up. Cool. Well guys, thanks for joining again. That was how to replace a alternator on a 2009 Hyundai Accent. This will work for all of the Hyundai vehicles and Kia vehicles with the 1.6 liter engine. That would be like Rios, Santa Fe's, and Elantras. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to see more. And we'll see you next time.